that's why I work in retail, and that's kind of why I do what I do. Is I think it's really a cool opportunity when you start to work in small and independent businesses to actually try to create community. Euclidean zoning was really saying industrial uses over here, housing here. And as we move towards cleaner technology, there's just not as much of a need to really separate that out. Even you see with urban agriculture, people are producing food in cities. You can have goats next door to you. So there's just not as much of a need to separate out those uses anymore. And the more you integrate those uses, the more walkable you are.
David, I want you to want to ask her a question instead of not wanting to ask her a question.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to roll.
Yeah, we're rolling. We're rolling.
All right, good.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for our 6th episode, my co-host David Adamson and I interviewed Sarah Wiebenson, who is a senior project manager with the Community Vitality Department for the City of Boulder. I first met Sarah a couple of years ago through a program called the Boulder County Leadership Fellows, which we both completed during the 2019-2020 cohort year. Sarah is a big believer in developing community through walkable neighborhoods that are tightly integrated with local retail, and her efforts working for the city reflect those values. The names of many organizations and projects were mentioned in this episode. Please visit our website at sharingboulder.us for links and other information related to this episode. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Sarah Wiebenson.
Sarah, welcome to Sharing Boulder. David and I are excited to have you on the show. So Sarah Wiebenson, please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you both for having me. I am a senior project manager with the Community Vitality Department for the City of Boulder. And one of my projects is the citywide retail strategy, which I'm here to talk about today. We are pursuing goals of affordability and inclusiveness and representing a lot of city objectives through retail. And a little bit about myself, just my background. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is very similar to Boulder. Politically, we call it the People's Republic and joke that you need a passport to get in. But I grew up in these very walkable neighborhoods, and I've lived in Chicago and New York, DC. I'm an urban planner by training and got my degree in Chicago. And so when I first moved to Boulder, I gravitated to the West Pearl neighborhood, which is very walkable, and had this really great model of, being able to walk out my door and 24 hours a day, you could get a thing of milk or some crackers or whatever you need with Lolitas. And so what we're kind of looking at is where else in the city do people have that kind of access, and where are the gaps, and how do we fill that in?
Awesome. So you said you're from the City Vitality Department?
Community Vitality.
Community Vitality. So how big of a department is that? Like, how many colleagues do you have?
We have about 60 people, and it's a mix of district management. We manage all of the parking districts in town, the commercial districts where there is what's called a general improvement district overlay. So the property owners within those districts contribute through a mill levy, an additional tax, to a fund that creates access improvements, economic vitality improvements, beautification. And we have 3 in the city of Boulder. One is downtown Boulder, the other is University Hill, and the third is the Boulder Junction Access District.
Wow. So when you say 60 people, you mean 60 city employees in that department?
Yes. That's a mix of parking enforcement officers, administrative staffs. We sell all of the neighborhood parking permits, all of the parking and access kind of related products come out of our department. And then we also do district management, which is working with Downtown Boulder Partnership, the Hill Boulder Merchants Association, all of the commissions for the 3 districts, we staff those. And then we do economic vitality, which is really looking at the policies of the city, how we can support small businesses. This past year was very busy with administering grant programs, working with our colleagues across the different departments to try to create outdoor dining opportunities, curbside pickup, really keep economic activity going during COVID, but in a very safe and socially distanced way.
And Sarah, can we just go back there a little bit, because in order to promote democracy, we want people to know what all this means. Maybe talk about the district management, and then just back up and describe that a little bit more about how the city is, in different areas, it is working to support economic activity. And
yeah, it differs by district. So in Boulder Junction, we've really focused on it being the transit village. And so one of my projects there is to support the commissioners who are looking at a wayfinding system for that district. So we can really kind of work with the public, engage the public in all the different types of access tools there. So we've got the bus system coming in through RTD. We've got bike sharing, car sharing. We've got a development that's going to have kind of a paseo, these sort of walkable alleys with economic activity going on there. Really creating a system of signage that's both, traditional wayfinding, but also really highlighting all the innovations going on in that district. On University Hill, it's really about economic revitalization. So that district used to be a regional hub for dining and entertainment. People would go dancing at Tulagi. And over the decades, it's seen a decline. And since 2014, the city has had a revitalization strategy, which is another project of mine to help the stakeholders up there envision the future for University Hill and how we're going to get there. And then downtown, we work very closely with the Parks District, or the Parks Department, Downtown Boulder Partnership. We help do improvements to the mall and support events and other activities down there. And so it's just each district has its own character, and we work to support it.
Well, my parents met at the Sink in 1957, and I think it was a thriving area then. Yeah, and I always enjoy going to the Sink. There's a lot of opportunity there. The new hotel is probably, I think, an important part of your strategy, right?
Yeah, what we identified in 2014 were 5 Catalyst sites. And so it's been wonderful that 3 out of the 5 have shifted into kind of implementation of the catalytic direction, I guess. So the old bookstore is now a Walgreens. That was huge to really generate economic activity there and be an anchor store that would bring people to the Hill. We have the CU Conference Center that would have been located down at Folsom and Arapahoe. And through negotiations with the city and a lot of support by the city council and others, CU is happy to be locating it near Mackey and on Broadway and really be a part of the revitalization efforts on the Hill. And then we have the Hill Hotel Project, which is a private development that the city has been working with them. We're actually going to be selling an underutilized district asset, there's a parking lot there that is not performing as well as the other parking lot.
The hotel is going to be at where Bova's convenience store is?
Yes, and one of my tasks is working with all the impacted businesses on the site, and that's where we get into something I'd be happy to talk about, which is our affordable commercial efforts. We have longstanding small and independent businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses on the hotel site, and the developer contributed to a relocation assistance fund that the city will administer. And we're actively working with them to plan for retaining them in Boulder and finding them new locations. And a bunch of them are already finding new locations on the Hill, so they'll even be able to maintain their Hill customer base. And this is seen as actually a great opportunity to fill the vacancies on the Hill. We had about 10 vacancies, and now we're down to 3.
How would you define, since it's such an important part of the city, what was part of the problem and how you're trying to change that, and if it's related to the lack of diversity of the user groups?
On the Hill, that is definitely part of the conversation, is working on diversifying both the neighborhood of the Hill, that you have entire streets that are all rentals, that are primarily students renting those units, and just wanting to try to break that up. A lot of folks are hoping to have more faculty, graduate students, and other members of the community live on the Hill, so that there's not as much of a dominant culture, a homogenous culture there. So we definitely get into that in the commercial district, trying to diversify the types of retailers and restaurants that are there. And we've made some progress where, the Sink is a wonderful example. Cafe Aeon, you could sit down and have table service, and that's more appealing to families and professors. And we've been able to attract some additional sit-down dining concepts since 2014. So we're starting to diversify that. We also, things come in waves. When I first started, it was a lot of taco places. I think we had about 5 taco places. Now, for some reason, chicken is it. Everyone wants to come in and sell chicken. So we're kind of trying to limit the number of new chicken concepts, but welcome them at the same time, and try to, have Rosenberg's Bagels is coming in. That's a regional draw, a Denver concept. They're going to open up an ice cream shop as well. And so as we move towards that goal of diversifying, the retail can be an important part of that as well.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned the affordable commercial program that you're doing on the hotel site. So does that mean that these you're helping them navigate rental agreements that allow them to, or is it like a deed restricted kind of affordability, or is it more like you give a grant to help them pay rent or help them navigate the lease process, or how does the rubber hit the road in terms of like actually helping people move their business into that area?
Yeah, we're coming at it from a number of different ways. The affordable commercial would not actually be on site for the hotel project, but what they're doing is contributing to a relocation fund. So they're providing support for the city to help them remain in Boulder. And it's really one of a number of different ways that the city supports small business retention. So we actually just put out an information packet to the City Council that by the time this airs will be posted online. And that goes into if we want to move towards expanding and formalizing an affordable commercial program in the city, that's an option. But what we currently do is we have a number of properties citywide that are on, within other facilities. So we've got Mustard's Last Stand is in the Park Central building. We've got all of the Central Area General Improvement District, the downtown improvement district that we manage. We have 11 commercial spaces there. So the city really has an opportunity to provide below market rate leases to the types of businesses that we've heard through our surveys that people would like to retain in Boulder, those small and independent businesses that can serve a more diverse customer base in Boulder to make it more welcoming and inclusive. And so what we can do is craft some eligibility criteria for those spaces that are going to be a part of an affordable commercial program. And so we're looking at a pilot for that downtown right now. We also do a lot of just small business support programs. And if we want to move towards making Boulder more affordable, we can look at things to bring their costs down. So it's not rent subsidies. That would be very difficult to scale up and afford. But we can do things like the Partners for a Clean Environment, the PACE program. They did a pilot last year where they helped food-based businesses, especially minority-owned food-based businesses, replace their refrigeration equipment. So there was a kind of triple bottom line there of helping a more inclusive business base, replacing outdated, non-energy efficient equipment to be more sustainable, and also helping to reduce those costs and generate more economic activity in town. So I think those kinds of programs are a great model. Yeah. And
that's great. And just speaking about cost and reducing the cost basis, that I think is an idea that's shared both for housing and for commercial is, addressing the number one cost, which is land appreciation. And I'm wondering if you've looked at, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Roxbury, and just the idea that community land trusts take the land out of the speculative market, and thus they control that increase of that portion of land, of cost inflation, and then you can, manage the others better. And I'm wondering if you've looked at that at all,
Yeah, I haven't looked at that particular initiative, but that is kind of part of our five-legged stool of affordable commercial is we recently, in two different redevelopment projects, negotiated restrictive covenants that these are private developments, but they will contain a percentage of commercial square footage that will be permanently affordable. And so those spaces will be available to, again, those kinds of tenants that meet those city objectives as far as small and minority-owned, women-owned businesses. But the deed restriction is really key there, that these are privately generated affordable commercial spaces that will be affordable in perpetuity. The other way that we're approaching that is a conversation around community benefit. So for projects in Boulder that are seeking additional height, you have the ability, let's say you're in a district that limits the building height to 35 feet, you could ask for additional height up to 55 feet through the planning board site review process. But in exchange, you need to provide a community benefit to the city. And that would be either contributions to the Affordable Housing Fund through inclusionary housing ordinance, or what's being discussed right now at the City Council is whether for commercial projects, you would be required to provide affordable commercial space on site. Again, deed restricted, maintaining those spaces in perpetuity. We are looking at some safety valves there that would be, under certain circumstances, you could request to the planning board that you could not meet that criteria on site. And so that would generate an in lieu fee to the city instead. That could be used towards other programs to bring down that occupancy cost or operating costs for those businesses elsewhere.
And could you just talk a little bit about the extent of that, where that community benefit is available? Because it is very limited, right? I mean, it's just a few small areas of the city that could be utilized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right now there's something called Appendix J, and Appendix J is the map of where you can do that. And part of this conversation, which we're calling Community Benefit Phase 2, is whether to get rid of that map altogether. I think some additional analysis is going on right now as to what that would mean, but that is part of the discussion for sure.
Oh, that's exciting to hear about.
You can talk freely about the planning board because by the time this airs, we'll have aired our other episode with Dave Ensign, who explains all about the planning board and how that works and what its purpose is. So it was more of a comment than a question.
This is a very educational podcast. It's great.
Well, we're going to put a picture of the Appendix J map, that I'm looking at right now. And
okay, so time out. Sarah, please explain Appendix J just a little bit better for me because it sort of just went over my head. So.
I wish I could defer to my colleagues in planning and development services. I am not the expert in Appendix J, but
just give me an overview of what it means, because you guys were talking about it like you know what it means, and I don't. So,
well, and
David,
I have the map on the screen too. So,
my understanding is these, to limit the areas where height can be requested as a starting point. So often you kind of start small and then expand based on the amount of demand. So I think the part of the analysis that I mentioned is taking place is how many requests have we gotten so far in the few years that this has been around? And, did it open up floodgates or was it really just kind of a trickle? And so I think that's how the decision is going to be made, is sort of seeing as we scale this up, what would the impacts be?
Interesting. Well, I would expect that there'd be a certain number of people, projects that wouldn't even consider asking because they assume the answer is no, unless it's a great expense or, difficulty of getting through the planning process. But
well, we hired an economic consultant to look at the financial benefit of the additional story that you get essentially. And so what we're trying to match is that the value that you're getting is, the community benefit is matched to that value. And so that was a really important part of this, was not just having it be very vague. It's saying you got this much additional square footage. that equals this amount. And so your contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund or to a affordable commercial space needs to be in line with that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. And I bet you run across this all the time. And, but, you know, as a nonprofit developer and in being in discussion with a lot of developers, most developers that I talk to, and this isn't, you know, everyone for sure, but, you know, see that as a very difficult thing to do. They don't see a lot of benefit to that little bit of extra height. Mm-hmm. And so you know, we see very little innovation around building in this town, in my opinion. And you know, it's generally thought that it's just so difficult to do something with the city. It just takes a long time and it's costly. And I don't know that that's fair in every regard, but I'll be interested to see how that works. And I'm so excited about the idea of community benefit. You know, we've been trying to promote that with this pilot housing program, high community benefit, and just give people the choice, you know, that it's very easy to innovate if you want to add all this community benefit. You don't have to go through a special process. You check it off the box. And so I'm just hoping that that's another model you can choose, that, you know, if you want to do something that has high community benefit, then it's easier for you. It's not an additional step. It's like less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we're, you know, the Community Vitality Department, we're not on the regulatory side, but we do try to act as a partner to help clarify what some of those requirements are and really help get the word out about programs that are available to people. And so I think this is really, you know, the affordable commercial effort is really something that you don't see a lot across the country. So we're kind of out there in front a little bit, and no one is doing it through the community benefit process the same way that we are. And so the way the draft is so far is, you know, that we're going to try a few ideas out and we'll check in again in a year and a half or whatever it is, and we can keep modifying it. So we're excited about it.
I hope you can also add that to like Alpine Balsam, where the city also, you know, owns the land. And I've been very struck as a former Nature Conservancy employee and in touch with a lot of nonprofits around here, the Native American Rights Fund, Western Resource Advocates. A lot of nonprofits are very, very stressed, you know, before COVID by the inability for their employees to live here in Boulder.
Yeah.
And then their office space is also increasing in cost. And so we've been promoting the concept of something like the Alliance Center down in Denver, which is a big building full of environmental nonprofits, something like that at Alpine Balsam or somewhere else, you know, sooner rather than later, so that we can retain these offices and all the dynamism of all those younger people, at least working here. Of course, it's better if we can also house them, which we could do also at Alpine Balsam. And so I'm really looking forward. I think you're going in a great direction around exploring community benefit, and I hope it can be broadened because we have a lot of community assets that we're on the brink of losing, both for-profit businesses and nonprofit businesses, because we haven't handled, especially the housing side of this. But I don't know if you want to go into that, your ability as an innovator and with a comprehensive perspective to collaborate with your colleagues around, like at the Hill, we were talking about the nearby housing and the commercial areas. So are you able to coordinate across your silos to you know, help you innovate?
Yeah, I think there's a few things in there I want to respond to. First, just on the collaboration question, that is definitely a City of Boulder value that, you know, we strive towards all the time. And we very often are not siloed. I think that's something we do very, very well, is work across departments. And so pretty much all my projects involve at least 2 other departments. And there's a real benefit to doing that. You know, during COVID, I attended a crisis response webinar, and I was talking about what Boulder was doing as far as our economic recovery. And, you know, the the trainer said, you guys are 100% on track, because the way we approached it was by immediately gathering together all of our colleagues at the chamber, the Latino chamber, the Visitor and Convention Bureau, the Small Business Development Center, the county. I'm probably missing a few others, but it was a large group of organizations, and we created the Boulder Business Recovery and Response and Recovery Alliance. And that was phenomenal to just have everyone at the table, and we were coordinating on outreach and different policies and programs and grants, and not a lot of other places were doing that. So collaboration is definitely kind of where we start. Who else needs to be involved? Who needs to be at the table? And that's a pretty impactful thing to do. I did just want to speak to your thought about nonprofits and the Affordable Commercial Program. If we decide to go that direction and formalize it, the community benefit criteria for the tenants is not just businesses. That's kind of my bread and butter, what I tend to work on, but it would be eligible also for nonprofits, arts and cultural organizations, human service organizations, and other nonprofits. So there is this desire to retain businesses in Boulder that are at risk of being priced out across a lot of different sectors. One good resource for folks to look at is the citywide retail study that we did. We did a lot of survey work. We did a lot of analysis of our current retail base. And one of the cool things about what we did compared to a typical retail study, usually a retail study for a community, they just look at leakage, which is how much are our residents spending in other communities that we could try to capture here. Let's try to get every dollar that we can spend here. And we actually have, we found what's called a really good pull factor. We're actually pulling dollars in for the most part in most areas. But what we weren't doing was meeting people's needs for certain types of goods that served all members of our population. So we had a lot of folks who felt like they couldn't find the right kind of produce to cook their family's home cooking. We had plus size folks who felt like, Target is the only place they could go to find clothes, or senior citizens who felt like Macy's was the only place they felt comfortable shopping in Boulder. So we really looked at it as a welcoming and inclusive, an aspect of the city's comprehensive plan goals to be more welcoming and inclusive. We really approached it in a different way. And I think I'm speaking for myself, not the city of Boulder, but, philosophically, government is there to provide a public good that the market is not meeting. And so, there is this concern that as rising land prices go up, that we are not able to retain those small and independent businesses or businesses that might meet the needs of all of our community members. So that's where we're stepping in to say, okay, what is the government's role in this? So community benefit, looking at affordable commercial that's permanently affordable, creating eligibility criteria for who should be prioritized for those spaces. Those are the kinds of things where we can step in. We talked a little bit about, walkable retail as being another one of those goals that I think Boulder has a real challenge. I grew up on the East Coast. Cambridge, Massachusetts was founded in 1640, right? So that is not a land use pattern that's based on the car, because there were cow paths all over the Back Bay of Boston, and that's how the roads were made. So we have a challenge that we were, built once the car, most of Boulder's housing especially was built, in a different kind of format. And so trying to reintroduce walkable access to neighborhood goods and services is really, really hard. So when you ask sort of what kind of support can people offer, I think it is really looking at zoning and trying to rethink Euclidean zoning. I was going to bring up a little urban planning term there if people want to look it up, but Euclidean zoning was really saying industrial uses over here, housing here. And as we move towards cleaner technology, there's just not as much of a need to really separate that out. Even you see with urban agriculture, people are producing food in cities. You can have goats next door to you. So there's just not as much of a need to separate out those uses anymore. And the more you integrate those uses, the more walkable you are. So we've had neighborhood efforts to introduce a coffee shop or a little neighborhood grocer, and they failed because in the end, parking requirements and the other realities of code requirements made it very difficult. So So that's where we're just starting to have that conversation. And right now, the East Boulder sub-community planning process is the farthest along. But that's a good example of where they're really looking at East Boulder, which does not have a lot of walkable retail access, and thinking about where would we put it? What are those intersections that would benefit from a neighborhood grocery concept or a coffee shop, those things that people would like to be able to walk to. And then if you're living next door to that, you have to think, am I okay with having that next door? Am I okay if people other than just my neighbors use that coffee shop? Are we okay with people driving there? So we looked at, where are all the bus lines and where are the bus lines crossing where we don't currently have grocery access or pharmacy access. And so we've come up with some little nodes of, this is a possibility through that planning process. So that's a great project for people to look into if they want to participate in that kind of planning for reintegrating all the uses and getting away from that Euclidean model.
That's a beautiful way to start thinking about it. And I'm wondering if you could add to that with a planning scenario. I mean, that's a way that planners have of looking at, well, what if we do this and what if we do that, and how does it impact this and how does it impact that? And I'm wondering if you have really looked at a planning scenario of, dramatically reducing car access to, large areas. We've seen that in COVID, where it seemed to be pretty successful closing off the streets. And so specifically, I'm wondering if you guys have thought about that scenario of being bold. That's a great thing about Boulder. So being quite bold. And I want to build on your Euclidean example, because that was about public health and separating people from hazards. And really, there's not a bigger, in my mind, health emergency than the use of automobiles broadly in the United States. I mean, 40,000 people a year die, about 1.2 million are wounded in automobiles. And that's not talking that people get hit by automobiles, that's people in automobiles. And not against drivers. I'm not being against drivers here. I'm just talking about a technology and then a land use. And so I'm just wondering if there is a great opportunity to do zoning reform that tries to isolate people from this public health hazard. And, breathing toxic exhaust and diesel exhaust especially is not good for you. And then we have, of course, all the people having to commute in because we don't have housing for them. So I'm just wondering, have you, as a city, really looked at, a broad reform of the intersection between land use and transportation, and just say, hey, and this is why I bring back the issue of, the example of Vauban, the suburb of Freiburg in Germany. It's a 90-acre, largely car-free area. You can use cars very slowly, but you just can't park near your unit. So anyway, what's going on in that sort of, being bold? We have a climate emergency. We need to move away from fossil fuel autos for sure. What do you think of that direction and its ability to support your retail project?
Yeah, I can speak to the commercial district aspect of that for sure. That, again, looking at those older European cities, they were not built at the time of the car. And so they already had, that nice model of the plaza. And, there's a cultural aspect to it that people are used to taking public transit and going downtown. And, I lived in Europe for 2 years, did not have a car that whole time. And the whole city was built for access through these wonderful, high-speed rails and different modes.
But I just want to interrupt for 1 second. So Vauban is new. It's a 90-acre new suburb that they built there, as, connected to an older city. But so I just want to provide hope that it's not just because they inherited a nice plan, they then went out and created, a modern version of that.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the cultural aspect of it, right? That in America, I've heard a lot of folks say, I love commuting because that's when I listen to all my podcasts. That's my private time, my quiet time to myself. So there's just a cultural, when I didn't have a car, I sat on the bus and listened to those things, right? There's another way to do it.
On your bike, we can go down the bike path and listen. On one ear, just one.
1 year. Okay. So I think there's a cultural aspect to it also. Boulder is a wonderful example to talk about this too, is the pedestrianizing of commercial districts. In Boulder, it was very successful in the Pearl Street Mall. But a part of that, and this is a little bit controversial to say, is that we had 1,200 parking spaces in the immediate vicinity of the Pearl Street Mall. So for regional visitors to the mall, they knew that parking would be relatively inexpensive and very accessible. There were cities like Providence, Rhode Island that pedestrianized their downtown, and it was a real disaster actually for those businesses because they did not have a lot of foot traffic there. It was, from office uses and other things. And so in essence, it went the other way. It did not help them, and they undid it within
well, again,
20 years.
Precisely for what we were talking about, because they didn't have a coordinated approach. So, if all around Boulder, we really, which we've been trying to do in the RMX1 zone to get a little wonky that surrounds downtown, we could, instead of the luxury housing that's ever dominating there, we could emphasize, a denser housing around the downtown. This idea of reducing autos, improving public health that way, improving affordability, more housing units. That requires being able to deliver a benefit to everyone, which is our approach in Sharing Boulder. We think everyone benefits from compact form and more people-powered mobility, but it's not easy to deliver. Like you talked about Providence, that's, everyone points to that. Oh, you see, people won't get out of their cars. Well, at CU, they get out of their cars all day long. That's all they do is walk around. So culturally, Americans do walk if they have to, and it's beautiful. And there's things to see and buy. And so I'm just wondering how you personally look at the transition we need to make, around economic inequality, around racial segregation, around climate goals.
There's a lot to unpack there, but people will walk farther parking at a shopping mall parking spot to the front door of the shopping mall than they will when they're in a historic downtown. They don't want to walk whatever that was, a quarter mile to the entrance. So it really is perception and culture, and that's not. I'm a stubborn optimist. So I don't think any of that is unchangeable. It's just shifting people's mindset, and density. That's one of those things, right? It relies on density, a thriving commercial district, but people don't like the concept of density. So the way retailers look at it is feet on the street. It's not about being dense. It could be office workers, it could be tourism, it could be students. So it's just that cumulative variety of customers that's really needed. And they don't all have to live above the story. You don't need a 5-10 story building. They just need to have access, which can be through lots of different modes.
Well, I remember the 13th Street Bikeway, and the business owners along there were very concerned about the 13th Street Bikeway, but it went forward anyway. And then people liked it. And I think businesses have a good reason to be concerned about a change. I mean, it's hard to run a business. It's very hard. It's hard to adapt. I just can't believe the beautiful flexibility and pluck of our businesses in Boulder. I wonder if there's the scenario idea of really helping people see the benefit. Like, it involves some changes, but look at all these benefits of moving in that direction, not just a little bit. That's the problem, is just doing a little bit of something may not provide the benefit people like, but being bold, of course, scares people too. So as you work with a difficult retail situation, I'm wondering if you think a little bit of change is going to get us where we need to go.
Yeah, I think approaching things as pilots, doing it area by area, really doing kind of a finer grained approach, an incremental approach, take some of the fear out of it.
Nice.
So certainly with the affordable commercial, we have city-owned spaces where we've already started the ball rolling on that. And that's all in the information packet that went to council for May 18th is, here's all of the spaces that we offer at below market rates. And these are the kinds of nonprofits and social services and arts organizations that we've been able to help keep in town. And, do we want to make this more of a formal process? So sometimes just talking about things giving examples of who we've retained through these processes starts to make this seem more real and more achievable. And yeah, certainly that's why I think the walkable retail question is really interesting, of how do you undo 70 years of zoning to try to get to those models. And yeah, in Europe, you have the cultural ability to do that people understand it already. And in Boulder, you have a lot of will that people want to see walkable neighborhoods for a whole variety of reasons. So, as I said, I'm optimistic. We'll make some progress.
Well, I think the pilot idea, the incremental approach, that's a smart. Humans do know how to make great habitat for themselves. We've done it for a long time. And there's been an unfortunate 100-year detour into this fossil fuel enabled. I mean, it's insanity. It's it is insane what's occurred, but that's become normal. So, but even again, like in Boulder, I like to tell people, well, at CU, you can't just park anywhere or drive anywhere, and it's nice to, there's a lot of activity on campus, and it's a great example of a walkable environment that we have today.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
It's too bad that the alfalfa's closed, which makes your job, your goals of 15-minute neighborhoods so much more difficult. That's actually how we got connected recently. Was a couple people forwarded me that recent article in the Daily Camera that featured you and being interviewed about alfalfa's closing, and I was like, oh, I know that woman on the front in that picture, and so we started a conversation. But so maybe just actually, do you mind just commenting on that property and what's going on there, and is there any hope?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the reporter did a wonderful job of really getting into the challenges of grocery access and retail on the Hill in particular. The nice thing is the article drummed up some interest. We do have a number of different people looking at that site, and we're in contact with the property owners and the leasing agent. And so there is a desire to bring another grocery concept back there. I don't think they have secured a lease with anyone yet, but we definitely have been in touch with them about that. As he raised in the article, on the Hill, ideally you'd have grocery in the commercial district part of the Hill, the core. But it is an older area with smaller footprints, and even the smallest grocery concepts are about 25,000 square feet. And the retail spaces on the Hill, I mean, I was trying to find a 5,000 square foot space for vaccinations. The state was looking for a vaccination site, and we don't have retail spaces that are 5,000 square feet there. So, you have to figure out where you can put things. And again, neighbors want walkable grocery access, but they don't want a 100-car parking lot next to them. So you have to figure out, how can we get close to you, but not change the character of your district? And so one of the things I'm looking at is regional neighborhood market concepts that are smaller. And in cities, it's the bodega model, right? Everywhere in New York City, you can go downstairs from your apartment and you can get, a thing of milk and some crackers again, within walking distance. And that's the goal, is to try to find some locations where that would be feasible from a market standpoint.
To go back to the land issues, was the land at Alfalfa's, did they own the land, or did someone else own the land there? Do you know if that was a leased facility?
It was, yep. That was owned by someone else privately.
So again, I want to promote that idea of, just as we did with open space, have a city-owned or community land trust owned land. And so then there's not the continuous pressure on those owners to keep increasing the rents. And I think that that's just central to your vitality and to business owners' vitality plans in the futures. You just can't have, really, in a super desirable place that's been made super desirable, not just by the Flatirons, but by the city's investment in so much open space, the city's beauty. It's the success of a community that drives up land prices. So unless you do something to preserve vital sectors of the city, the working people, the businesses, you really can't have, and I'm not against markets or capital at all. That's not the point. The point is, as we did with open space, we have a great example. We bought the land, and now there's no more pressure on the habitat or the recreational resources. It's there for us. And I just wonder what you think about expanding that concept more broadly, of course, to housing, which is Goose Creek Community Land Trust. That's what we're trying to do. But on your standpoint, from the commercial, take that huge element of cost escalation out of the picture with the city owning the land or community land trust owning the land. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, in the sort of small business retention circles, land ownership has been one of the key ways to do that, is to encourage businesses to buy their property to be more stable. That doesn't work as well in a high land cost area like Boulder. So that is one kind of possible consideration in a more formalized affordable commercial program, is that for those projects that would be eligible to not build affordable commercial on site, they would contribute that value of the community benefit, that additional height, to some sort of fund that could include the creation of affordable commercial spaces elsewhere. The challenge is, we're kind of following that affordable housing model. The challenge is we don't have an affordable commercial trust, right? You don't have the entities that exist yet to operate those kinds of funds. So, that's one of the challenges being at the leading edge is we just don't have the models in place. So it may be in a different format rather than buying land, buying properties. It may be towards that direction of bringing the cost down.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'd still just want to push back. So we did a major land purchasing program here. We spent $1 billion from 1967, through today we preserved a third of the entire land base of Boulder County. So it's 450,000 acres. The Forest Service owns about a third of that. And then the city of Boulder and the county, through easement or fee, controls a third of the land base, 150,000 acres, the city with 45,000 acres. I mean, we bought it, and we did a sales tax to service the bonds, and we went for it. And so I mean, that's a tried and true method. The city is a popular place that has good credit. I mean, we could purchase Diagonal Plaza. We purchased Alpine Balls. We can purchase these centers and then do the beautiful program you're doing with affordable businesses. I mean, you could do that. And there's also another source of funding, Sarah, that I would encourage the city to consider, is that property values have risen tremendously in this town, and the people who own the land have had incredible windfalls. And we made transfer taxes, unfortunately, illegal in the state of Colorado. The city could lobby, and with a nice Democratic legislature, we could put on the ballot, it has as a constitutional amendment, but we could claw back the ability to do a transfer tax.
Yeah, it just really comes down to community priorities. So, anytime you adopt another fee, another tax, is this our priority right now?
Is there anything that sort of stands out as something you'd like to talk about that you want to respond to in the moment right now?
Well, I like that you ask people about what they're reading, because one of the books that I've really enjoyed recently is Second Mountain by David Brooks. I don't know if either of you have had the chance to see that, but he actually is initiating this whole project through the Aspen Institute as well, called the Weaver Project. And this is just my own personal kind of passion project, but it goes back to Jane Jacobs. It goes back to lots of people who have worked for many decades in urban planning about how you create those community relationships. And so that's why I work in retail, and that's kind of why I do what I do. Is I think it's really a cool opportunity when you start to work in small and independent businesses to actually try to create community. And that's why I loved Aaron's quote about community is sustainability, and people seeking out connections with other people. And in this last year with COVID, I think that was a really people took a big hit that they didn't have that coffee shop run-in and those daily conversations with people. Even on the bike path, you've got your masks on and you don't really know if that was your neighbor going by. So I'm really passionate about that urban planning, retail, independent, local business retention really has community character at its core. And when you go to a place that has, they have their new business district, rerouted road, and now they have such and such a motel and such a chain store, there's no there anymore. And so I really like that we're kind of heading back towards creating those community relationships and those connections. And I finally got around to reading Bowling Alone, and I love that it was the 20th anniversary edition, he has a whole section about, retail and how that is really, if you move to an online e-commerce, you miss that opportunity for social capital. So anyway, I just wanted to put that plug in for thinking about retail differently, that it's not just I went and got a cup of coffee. It's how did I feel when I went and got that cup of coffee, and who did I interact with, and how did that enrich my life to have that experience? So
yeah, the places we occupy define us in a lot of ways. And so to live in a beautiful place where you have those interactions is just really important.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. David, are you reading anything interesting lately?
I have been, and I've been reading the Owning the Earth, and then the next and another book about the history of land ownership by Simon Winchester that I will put in the show notes. But they both emphasize what a very narrow and peculiar form of land ownership we inherited. So the British, in around 1500, just started to enclose the land and push the peasants off, and just a small group of farmers owned it, mostly to grow sheep to sell to the Netherlands. And so this lucrative market in textile, raw material, changed the whole pattern of land ownership in the UK. And then that's what got exported to the United States. And it's just not a human way we've had of looking at land. We've looked at it much more as a community, the people, the different kind of people and animals, and, et cetera. And so I think it's exciting to keep that in mind, have that perspective of the way we're looking at things is rare and could be broadened or reformed.
Cool. Well, I'll be honest, I haven't been reading a lot lately. I've been doing a lot of canvassing for Bedrooms Out for People, helping with the petitions, and that's sort of been eating up my evenings lately. But I did listen to a podcast that you, David, recommended, this episode from Strong Towns. So Strong Towns is a podcast that we're both fans of, and there was an episode called something along the lines of Strong Suburbs. So it was a very interesting episode in which he detailed possible solutions for collaborative decision making with the residents of a street on how to do gentle infill. And the more I think about gentle infill, the more I like it, because there's lots of options for density, and a large apartment building surrounded by parking is not necessarily the most pro-social, pro-community structure that you can conceive of for your neighborhood. And but taking an existing neighborhood and adding micro condos or ADUs, or an end cap at the end of a street that's a bit more intensive, and then thinking about how do you make those decisions so that everyone's happy about it. Well, this guy's got some proposals on how to do that, and I just thought, I don't think I can summarize them very well, but it was a kind of a collaborative approach where the residents get to make decisions. If you don't live there, but you're a landowner, you're kind of a stakeholder, but you don't get the same kind of voting the way the residents do. So it was just I'll make sure that episode is referenced in the show notes.
I think you have just a beautiful way that helps people collaborate. And I think that's what Sharing Boulder is all about. It's an incredible city, incredible people. Let's work together. We love ideas. Let's implement some good ones. And so thank you for your approach.
Well, thank you both for having me on and for giving me the opportunity to tell people a little bit more about everything. There's always so much going on here. We have such an active populace that there's a lot of ideas. And just getting the chance to talk at length about, just a little slice of that is really great. So thank you.
Thank you for being on the show, Sarah. We really appreciate it. Peace.
This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by David Adamson and Philip Ogren. Sound and video editing was done by Philip Ogren. The intro music was sampled from Osladum by Gilberto Gil and is available for use under the Creative Commons Sampling Plus license.